if you were to get on TRT, hypothetically, I know it's something you've evaluated, considered, there is a range of what's considered physiologic, and that range is pretty damn wide. Like, you could be considered normal to one doctor interpreting it if you're at 300, which is pretty likely to not feel the same as 1100. When it comes to yourself and you were to evaluate, subjectively, presumably you feel like pretty decent right now, even though you have a 389 total T, but there is something about, intervention that seems attractive enough for you to flesh it out, maybe. Like, what are those factors that you think are worthwhile to maybe do yourself? And also, like, what are you thinking about when it comes to targets?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would, I would treat it the way I would approach it the way I would approach it with a patient, right? So even though I'll be the patient in this scenario, and by the way, I would absolutely do HCG as my first shot across the bow. Mm-hmm. So that's what I will do, actually. So I'm gonna do a few months of HCG and reevaluate, and I'll dose it probably at 1,000 units twice a week. So a vial is 10,000 units. That'll be I'll maybe do 15 weeks, 3 vials, and then reevaluate. So yeah, I'm starting out at 381. So that places me at about the 10th percentile. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I would want to know is, like, what's the response? So it's possible I will have a lousy response because, one, we don't know how much of my low T is gonadal, peripheral, or central. So option one is my T goes from 381 to 450, which in my view is a non-response. Like, people tend to fixate on like these numbers, and like, 380 to 450 or even to 500 is a non-response.
Yeah, and to be on drugs for that, it's like not even worth it.
Right. So if it doesn't get to 900 plus, then either the dose is insufficient or we have peripheral limitations. There's probably a gray zone where it goes to 650, and then I say, well, should we try 1,500 twice a week? And we can hum and haw on that axis. But let's assume it's one or the other. If I end up going 381 to 457, then I think the only logical thing to do is to do testosterone and just say, well, we've accepted the fact that your gonads have served you well for 32 of the last 50 years or whatever, 40 of the last 50 years. But it's time to put them out to pasture, and we're just going to have to rely on an exogenous hormone. And if it works, let's say my T is up to, 978, then I'm evaluating, okay, what are the measurable things that like have changed? So have I noticed a difference in mood, sleep, libido, recovery from workout, performance in workout, right? Do I feel stronger? Again, I'm pretty insulin sensitive, so I don't know that I'm going to see improvements there, but absolutely in some patients, we do look at markers of metabolic health. So the more metabolically dysregulated you are, the more likely you are to see improvements in glycemic markers on physiologic doses of testosterone replacement. And then, I'd want to make sure like things aren't going terribly wrong. Like, am I, developing horrible acne or some other side effect, or is it impairing my sleep or leading to hypertension or something like that? So basically, like my approach in me would be the same as it is in every patient that we go through this process with.
What is interesting that I just thought of is...
Sorry, one other thing, Derek. I'm equally interested in what my estradiol response is, because my estradiol, as you saw from that last test, was so low. It was 18.1 or something.
So one thing that is a pro for the HCG only, I don't know if I said this last time I was here, but the proportional aromatization intratesticularly that you would get should be higher from the same HCG equated total T.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I said that before, but
I know what you mean. And yeah, so I'm very interested, I believe a little bit higher is a little bit better. And so in an ideal world, like I'd like to know, okay, what's it like when my T is at the 80th to 90th percentile and my estradiol is north of 40, south of 60 probably, I think is about the sweet spot.
When you're looking at cardiac,
Obviously measured by LCMS, everybody.
yeah,
Very important.
When you're looking at cardiac markers reflecting estradiol's impact on what it may do from a protective standpoint, would you see reflections of, I forget if is it ADMA, that's the nitric oxide proxy?
Yeah.
Would you see improvements in that, do you suspect, with a higher estradiol, or have you seen anything to...
We don't measure ADMA and SDMA anymore.
Okay.
We found that they were so tightly correlated with homocysteine that it almost didn't matter. Because homocysteine is seems to be the most important determinant of their clearance, that, you know, we just basically manage the homocysteine and we're getting the same benefit. But that said, like I don't recall if we ever paid attention to the correlation between ADMA, SDMA, and E2.
It's because I know why I want high E2, for example, but it's like actually assessing the, you know, vasodilation or neuroprotective properties of it, other than subjective feelings of well-being, or am I forgetting stuff? Like, it's kind of hard for me to know. And it's just, I would love to have a biomarker proxy. I could say, like, here's why you wanted.
We had hoped 8 years ago when lab companies started pumping out ADMA, SDMA assays that this was the sign of, like, this was going to be our biomarker for endothelial health. But at least in our hands, it just turned out to be a proxy for homocysteine, which does impact endothelial health, but so do a lot of things. And we didn't think it was adding any value.